My name is Rachel. I'm 34 years old and I have an invisible illness. My dream was always to work in the NHS, but during my third year of university, training to be a therapy radiographer, I had Campylobacter food poisoning from chicken, which involved being admitted and stayed in my system for 6 months. I guess it didn't happen at the best time, but what was hardest to deal with was noticing my bladder and bowel weren't emptying like they did before. I felt scared and frustrated because I had a career plan, but I knew something wasn't right. I pushed through though, caught up on the clinical I missed and qualified with a 2-1. I started working as a Band 5 therapy radiographer, but this was becoming more difficult and soon it was confirmed my bladder and bowel were failing at the age of 21. It wasn't long before I could no longer work due to interventions and pain. I felt like I had failed and lost all the identity I thought I had. Who was I now? To cut a long story short, in 2012 I had to have an ileostomy due to the bowel not emptying at all. I was severely malnutritioned, weighing less than 7 stone. This surgery did help and I started putting on weight. As well as this, I've had quite a journey with catheters, and in 2015, after a cystoscopy, it showed the cells in my bladder had begun to mutate and I had to have this removed and a urostomy formed. It was then I became what the stoma world call as a double bagger. I was no longer in horrific pain, and actually this was when I came out of being victim, started a blog and found a community. I was eventually diagnosed with autonomic neuropathy due to the Campylobacter food poisoning, suffer from regular urosepsis and have a prolapsed stoma due to ileostomy syndrome. My stoma bags are my buddies. They are part of me and help keep me alive. My bags and scars are my badges of honour. They tell a story of survival and represent my strength and resilience. I believe I know myself much more deeply and intimately than I ever would have without this illness. Sometimes it can be tough, but I'm grateful that now I can use my voice to advocate and support other fellow ostomates and help make changes in health and social care by sharing my experience and helping to change care for the better. This was not the life I had planned for me. However, now I would not want to change any of it. It shaped me into the person I am today, who has been to the depths of despair and nearly died multiple times, but now I'm able to accept my health, my bags, and be able to help others by sharing my experience and owning my story. I feel quite emotional actually, because I just think back to that girl, who was 21, who had this whole future ahead of her, and how scared I was and how I thought my life was over. I just didn't think I would get past my 20s, survive that long, and I just didn't think I would not certainly be thriving like I am now. And it makes me feel emotional because I have come so far, but also how scared I felt and how lonely it was going through that illness. It was huge. And it was really difficult because I was trying to push through and work in a busy radiotherapy department and knowing that my body wasn't working the way that it wanted to. And it was difficult. I suppose I was in an element of denial and I kept trying to push through. But there was a point where I had to realise that, my health was getting worse and I would have to give up my job. And then my whole identity was around working in the NHS. That was all I wanted to do from a really, really young age. To then suddenly have that taken away, who was I? I was this ill girl in my 20s. I couldn't go out drinking with my friends. I couldn't go meet people. And it really felt like my whole world had just gone. I think it was hard for me because it took such a long time to get a definite reason as to why my organs were failing. That was the hardest part of all of it really, was not knowing why. Was this in my head? Was this due to the Campylobacter? I wasn't sure why suddenly my bowel and bladder weren't emptying, and that was one of the hardest things. So the first initial things after I was an inpatient with Campylobacter, and I took a while to come out of my system, and I noticed that not only was my bladder not empty and I was getting a lot of urinary tract infections, and they weren't clearing, and it just felt, my body felt different. I was very exhausted. It was difficult, but I found that, you know, I couldn't empty like I was, and things weren't the same. You know, going to the toilet wasn't like it was before, and I knew something had changed. I think I wanted an answer. I wanted to know, why was this happening, and nobody could really give me an answer. And it wasn't until further down the line I was able to kind of realise why it was happening. But it was just, you have a lot of urinary tract infections. Then I went into retention, and I had to have suprapubic, and I had to have a lot of catheters. You know, I had to start off with self-catheterising, which was really difficult. Actually, due to being a healthcare professional, and I was working in the radiotherapy department, in my lunch break I went over to meet the urology nurse, and she was going to show me how to self-catheterise, but she didn't have enough time, so she gave me the box and said, you know, I lived with a urology registrar, and said, oh, get him to show you. And I went back with this box, and the guy was outside, and I just didn't know what I was doing. And I actually think that being a healthcare professional kind of impacted my care in that respect, because I was a 21-year-old. I didn't know where my urethra was, you know. I had to do this all by myself. And I think if I had maybe more education at that time, I might have ended up with a suprapubic catheter, you know, a lot further on the line than I did. No, actually, I don't think I did. And I think I was almost in the persona of, I wasn't able to say, you know what, I need you to show me how to do it. You know, I felt like it was almost accepted that I should know, and I should be able to do this to make it easier for them. And actually, going back, if it happened to me now, I would certainly say, no way, I would want to be shown. You know, it isn't okay for somebody to go in and do that by themselves. So I think it did impact my care in a way, because I had my own, I suppose, my own thoughts on how I should be, but also I was looked as somebody that worked in the hospital, that I would know. But actually I was a scared young 21-year-old whose organs were failing, and I knew that it wouldn't be long before I could work. And it just brings me back to the times when I was just, you know, 7 stone, before I had my stoma surgery, just completely, there was things that were happening in my care that weren't okay, but I felt like I couldn't really talk about it. I couldn't ask anybody. I couldn't really advocate for myself, because I was just so stuck in that my world has exploded. And I guess I can say this now, I probably was in that victim mentality. I was in that mentality of, you know, this is happening to me. I wasn't able to express my thoughts, my beliefs, and I have a good example of this. So when I had my surgery in 2012, and I had my ileostomy, I was about 24 years old, and they told me I needed the stoma surgery, and within a couple of weeks I had it. I did not want to know anything about it. You know, an ex-healthcare professional, you would think I would want to know everything. I didn't want to know anything. I literally couldn't Google it. My friends were Googling it for me. I went in not really knowing, because I couldn't accept that this was happening to me. I couldn't believe that I would have to have a stoma. And I dealt with patients with stomas, but for me, that shocked me. That really, really shocked me. And actually, when I had my second stoma, my urostomy, when I was 28, I dealt with that totally differently. I actually watched the operation of removing the bladder before I had the surgery, and I was more engaged. I was more able to ask questions, but I think I was just so scared and in rabbit in headlights back then. I just didn't know. I didn't know what was happening. I think maybe just having a healthcare professional that could recognise that I was very scared and would able to sort of spend time with me to get me to open up. You know, I can't really remember that time well, because it was quite traumatic. I can't remember it in particular, and maybe some people did try to do that, but I think just maybe recognising that this is big stuff, you know, especially any age it's big stuff, but when you're young and you've got a career in front of you, and maybe asking what my fears were and talking me through, or recognising that this person isn't really engaging with us and able to find a different route to help me, because actually the question is, was I fully consented You know, I probably I was fully consented by them, but I wasn't really hearing anything. I think I had like hold music. Like I just completely disassociated, and I just thought, this isn't happening to me, and I couldn't really, people were telling me what was going to happen, and I wasn't really able to engage. I wasn't able to process this was happening to me, which again shocked me, because you would think with my training, I would be like, right, okay, we're going to do this, we're going to do that, but none of that. I think I found it very difficult being an inpatient. I have had many, probably going to be in its hundreds of admissions. Just last year I had 4 admissions for urosepsis. I've had a lot of admissions, but I find that it's quite difficult. When you have a little bit of knowledge, but you don't have all the knowledge, you're in this difficult kind of place where it's sort of, you can see things maybe can be done differently, or about yourself, and I want to know everything, or what my bloods, and it can be, I was, you know, eventually I did become like that. I wanted to know everything, and that kind of shocked me. And also where I could see changes, but things were happening on the ward that if somebody had asked me, I could probably give really good feedback, because I thought, oh, if they did that, that might be different. So I think the most challenging thing to talk about was that sex was really painful for me. So when I had my bladder removed and I had my urostomy formed in 2015, due to the surgery, things weren't the same down there. And I was having sex and it was really painful, but I couldn't tell anybody. You know, and I've done a lot of talks, I do a lot of public speaking, I can speak to doctors and nurses, but there was something about it that I just could not speak to my team. You know, I actually spoke to 200 nurses around, not being able to talk to my team around sexual function. But I at that point when I delivered that presentation, which was the most emotional presentation I'd ever given, because it was currently happening for me, I hadn't even spoke to my team. You know, many times I used to come into my GP appointments and I used to have it written down, you know, sex is painful. And I would go, right, now you're going to talk about it, now you're going to bring it up. And they'll start talking about my kidneys or about urosepsis, and then I may as well have just done that and thrown it away, because I was never asked again, you know, what was on your list. I couldn't bring it up. And it wasn't until I started doing some talks at St. Bart's and difficult conversations in healthcare, and I realised, you need to talk about it. You need to go to your team, urologist and GP, and talk about it. So I did. So I think it was just before I was doing a talk, my GP, he turned to me and said, oh, you've got any more talks? And I was just about to leave, and I said, yes, actually it's about not being able to talk about how sex was painful and the sexual function discussion and how it needs to be more open and talked about. And he looked at me, closed the door, sat back down and said, tell me. And he referred me to gynecology. I got a referral to psychosexual health, and yeah, like the rest was history. But that took years for me to get the courage, for somebody who's very quite open now. You know, I wasn't at the beginning, but now I'm very open, advocate for others and myself. I couldn't say and talk about, because I was worried what they would think. You know, my doctors were quite good looking. That was a little bit of a barrier. You know, I just thought, I couldn't, and I think it was maybe a bit of shame attached to it as well. Like, and I tried to fix it myself. So I went to online and I bought dilators, which isn't really safe, to be honest. And I tried to sort of fix it and work around it, but it didn't work. I think it comes down to taboo. I think there's still stigma into how do you bring it up? You know, what do you say? Will the other person get offended? You know, will they report me? And I think there is a lot of fear around it. But for me, it is so important to talk about it, not just for stoma patients that have had stoma surgery, which of course it's going to affect things, but for any condition, because sex is like, it's an important part of life. You know, it is. It's very important to me. So to have that taken away out of my whole journey of everything that I've been through, actually that time where I didn't feel like a woman, I felt like I couldn't give sex to the person I was with at the time, and it really impacted me more than anything else. But nobody really was able to sort of ask me or notice. But I think now there are changes in place. I know stoma care nurses are trying to talk about sexual function more and bring it up. Oh, it was soul destroying. absolutely soul destroying. I felt like inside I was just dying, because it really was taking over my life. I was thinking about it all the time. I thought of different ways I can move around it. I thought the partner at the time would leave me. I completely felt awful, and it was a really, really difficult time, because I felt that my whole sense of being a woman, sex is important to me, like I said, and I just felt like my whole world was just imploding, and I had nobody to turn to. I couldn't really talk to my friends about it. I didn't let anybody know. I was just trying to sort of manage it myself, and I was in a really, really dark place, if I'm honest, and I was in a dark place. I was trying to do my advocate, and I was doing lots of work with the hospital and loads of talks, but deep inside I had this big secret. I was supposed to call it a secret, you know, that sex was difficult. It was a part of me that was affecting me, and I just couldn't talk about it. And then I felt probably annoyed with myself and anger towards myself for somebody that's so open-minded and speaks her mind, can't even turn to her team and ask, can I have some help? I think it's a sort of a health and safety issue, really, not bringing it up, because it should be talked, you know, especially when you've had the surgery that I've had and the surgery that comes with having a stoma. But also with any condition, you know, I do think that it's important to talk about it. But I think healthcare professionals don't really know how to have that conversation. You know, being British, we put our head in the sand sometimes, and, you know, we don't want to open a can of worms. But actually, I needed that can of worms to be opened, and I almost needed permission to be able to talk about it. You know, the fact that if somebody had brought it up first, it might have then been able for me to discuss. I think I just needed somebody to ask me, you know, I probably, to the point I probably wanted it quite crudely, and, you know, how's your sex life? You know, for me, that would have worked well. For other people, maybe a little bit more diplomatically. But if I was asked that, I would then feel like I could talk about it. Whereas when you've got more important issues, like, I guess, my kidneys, the urosepsis, that's why I felt like I couldn't discuss about it, because I thought, oh well, it's not a big deal. Actually, it was a huge deal for me. It was my whole being, it was my whole sense of self. It was massive. But I thought, because it wasn't compared to the other things, and it goes back to what we say with the whole what matters to you movement in healthcare. You know, what mattered to me was that I can be a woman, and I can be with my partner and have a healthy sex life. And that out of everything I've been through, all my health and care things, nearly dying, it was that was the hardest to talk about. But when I did have that conversation, I was so relieved. Like, I was so relieved, and I got referred to the places I needed to be referred, and there was issues there that needed to be sorted, and they were, you know, and actually I got the help I needed. But I just needed a little bit of encouragement to be able to have that conversation. And I have many, many patients that come to me who've had stomas that have the same issue. They want to bring it up, but they feel ashamed to. And I don't know if it's because we've been through so much of our surgery, it's almost like, oh, it's not that important. I think we can do that. Because when I first had my stoma the first time, I just remember when they told me, the first thing that went through my head was, will my partner leave me? That was the first thing. I didn't think about myself, I didn't think about my family. I thought, how's my partner going to see me and have sex with me with this bag? How am I actually going to, will he leave me? And I wasn't able to ask those questions again, because back then I'd lost my voice even more than I did further on. You know, and that was what I really wanted to know. And actually they couldn't answer it to me, but they could talk about things that you could do during sex to maybe hide the bags. There are different options to make it a little bit more easier, but nobody had that conversation with me. Okay, so a stoma is where there's been surgery to create an opening in the abdomen and the tummy, and a piece of intestine is pulled in out of the skin, and then a bag is attached to the stoma, which then catches the waste. This can be either feces, or it can also be urine. So in my case, the ileostomy, I've got the piece of ileums come out, and then feces is in the bag. And then on this side, my bladder's been removed, the ureters from the kidneys have been joined to a piece of bowel, another bit of ileum, and that's been come to the surface and then collects urine into the bag. So I've got these 2 bags. They on my stomach. I change them probably 2 to 3 days, and I have to always have them to collect. They're my 2 buddies. They come with me everywhere, and yeah, they're always with me. And it's been a process actually, accepting them and learning to love them. When I first had this one, I've got a prolapse stoma, so mine's actually a lot longer than it should be, which is a very rare complication. And I really didn't like my bag. So when I got told I needed a second stoma, I thought, how am I going to cope? Then when I came out, I remember just sitting on the balcony and the sun was out, and I remember thinking, yeah, now you embrace your life, now you live it, now you've got your 2 bags, you're not in pain, just learn to accept it. And I've gone on a long journey of accepting that, yeah, they're part of me, but learning to love my body the way it is now, and go through that process. Because at first it was hard. Looking in the mirror, it was difficult. Changing my bag for the first time was tricky. But over time, and doing things like affirmations, saying I love my body, writing and journaling, I would say that now I love my body far more than I did before. And I dress better now than I ever did before. I wear tighter clothes now. But it has been a journey, and many people who have stoma surgery, they may straight away be okay and embrace their stoma and be able to do everything. But a lot of people aren't, and I was from the calibre of I really struggled. But when I started my blog, Rocking 2 Stomas, and I then was able to find a community, that is where it all changed for me. And I thought, I'm not alone anymore. I thought I was the only person with 2 bags. I'm not. I created a Facebook group where we've got 600 members, right? It's like growing, and I thought I was the only one. And I think this is the key thing, is there are communities out there for any condition. It's connecting. When that happened to me, I left victim. I embraced my life. I go traveling. I've been to Canada and Thailand, and I'll be sunbathing in my bikini. It doesn't really doesn't affect me. Oh, that was probably the go-to top question. That is probably the biggest question that comes up, is about sex. And then it makes me think, okay, if these questions are coming up, really quite taboo questions, if they're coming up, then, why aren't healthcare professionals bringing it up? And actually, would they learn a lot if they could see these communities and some of the things that are bringing up to make sure it's included? And to be honest, the stoma care nurses are fabulous, and they are now realising, and they are noticing what needs to be talked about, and a lot of them are getting training and help to be able to have these conversations. So when I first had my first stoma, I was in a long-term relationship, and that broke up, and then I started dating, and I have tried many different ways, and what I have learned through trial and error is I try and tell the person straight away. Whether it's the first or maybe the second time we meet, or I try to tell, because I'm not ashamed of my bags. They saved my life, right? If the person's got a problem with them, then they're not worth it for me, and they're kind of like a filter, I guess, for like good and bad men, and whoever. But for me, they kind of, who is worthy of me or not. So I try and bring it up fairly straight away. If I'm friends with them first, that helps. But I have had a few experiences where it hasn't gone to plan. People have had issues with the bags, but I've realised that it's more about them than it is about me. And I very early on, I remember I was with somebody, and I said to them, I was with them, and I said, you don't like the bags? And they said, well, I do like the bags. And they loved me, right? They had no issue with the bags, but I realised I had an issue with the bags. And that's why I had to do all this work on loving myself and accepting my bags and accepting my story, to then be able to date. And now it's not a problem for me. I bring it up, you either like it or you don't. And my last partner was brilliant, and he had some health issues, and he was there wasn't an issue for him, and that helped me then feel a lot more comfortable to be able to. Now I'm on this dating process, not quite ready yet, but when I am, I will own it, and I will own it, and if they like it, fabulous. If they don't, they don't. I think my family, it'd be great if my mum was here today to be able to have an interview, because she could probably give a whole different perspective. It was hard for them. It was really hard for my parents to see me so young, just being so ill and nearly dying so many times. I think it was really hard for them. And my mum, she will admit this, you know, my mum struggled at first. She struggled to accept them. She struggled to accept seeing them, because sometimes when I'm in comfy clothes, they might hang low, you know, and she did struggle with that. But I was part of an IBD awareness, like, kind of YouTube thing, and my mum then was watching it, and she was learning more from other people. So then she realised what she thought about it, and it changed her perspective, and is very, very supportive of everything I do, and it has really helped my mum accept it. Like, belonging to a community, or seeing me belong to a community, and listening to other people, just sort of like, yeah, it's a part of me. They're not really a big deal now. Yes, definitely. You know, I get it quite a lot of the time, you know, from the public, when I need to use disabled toilets sometimes to change my stoma bags. If I'm having a leak, then I might have to do that. I have had comments before, because yes, I'm young, I don't look like I have a disability, and there is some judgment. But I've also had it from healthcare professionals as well. You know, I've gone to A&E, and I've had doctors not really believe me that I've got 2 bags, because they can't compute that I've got stoma bags, not just 1 but 2. They couldn't, and they really, I had to physically show them. And I get that quite a lot, because I don't look how society expects to look. But there's been so much awareness happening with stomas, that actually this is now breaking, and people are more aware that younger people can have it, and there have been loads of campaigns with disability toilets and invisible illnesses, that it is become, we are talking about it more. You know, back 10-20 years ago, this wasn't the case. It was so taboo, and now we are trying to break those taboos and stigmas. I think at first it was hard, and now I'm sort of kind of used to know what to say back, but it felt like you don't listen to what I'm saying. It felt like everything about me was wrong, and that was a key throughout my whole career. Is I thought that people didn't believe me, so I would explain everything, because I thought and they'd be like, Rachel, we know you're in hospital with sepsis, you're in resus, like, we know. But I felt like I had to, because of that not believing, because I didn't fit into a box. You know, for me, I didn't fit neatly into a diagnosis box. You know, it's been a lot of different things happening. It's quite hard when you've had that journey. You are going to be on your guard. I think just don't judge a book by its cover. You know, what you see in front of you, and take a walk in the patient's shoes. What do you think they're feeling? You know, maybe actually see if you can come from their point of view, and what is important to them, not just what your itinerary and your agenda is, and actually listening to the patient, but also listening to what's not being said. You know, like, if I had doctors that could listen to what I was not saying, in that, you know, I was in such a desperate state when I couldn't talk about sexual function. You know, if somebody could notice that and talk about it, then that would have been better. But just listening, and not thinking you know all the answers. You know, because a patient is an expert in their own right. They know their bodies. Because actually, you know what, if I went back and I worked clinically now in radiotherapy, I would be so different. I thought I knew it then, quite arrogantly. I thought I understood. Well, of course I didn't understand what patients went through. How can I? I've not been through it. Now I've been through a process. Now I realise there's so much that I missed. There's so much I would do more for patients and for families. You know, and I was quite good at my job, and I was really good with patients, but I didn't know. And now I would want to take a walk in their shoes more. What is it really like? You know, yes, we have all these lists that we've got to do, and all these things, but actually, what is it like for them, and hearing their voice and involving them in service redevelopment and changes. Being brave enough to ask, you know, being curious. You know, sometimes being a healthcare professional, you've got to be curious. You've got to be curious about, okay, a patient might be telling me this, but is there anything deeper? And being curious and asking about, you know, is everything okay? Are there any issues in that area? But not being afraid to ask these questions. If you get it wrong, you get it wrong. But there are ways you can say it. With patients like me, I probably would have hugged the person that actually said that to me, because that was all I was desperate, wanted somebody to ask me. I think I would say that you are not alone. You know, there are thousands of us out there. Find a community. Look at, there's loads of amazing charities. Look on the internet. There's also Facebook groups, and there's so much support out there, and support groups that meet up locally. You are not alone. Find your tribe, you know, find us and speak to real people that have had stomas, and be open and honest with your stomas. They're brilliant and they want to help. And I think if you've got a question and you are too embarrassed to say, just ask them. They've probably heard it before, and it's better to talk about it than to not. Gosh, that's quite hard to answer, but I would say I am strong, but I have been through so much, but my illnesses don't define me. I had the opportunity to get to know my authentic self, you know, and I like myself and I love myself. And I never did properly before my stomas. You know, I certainly was not kind to my body. And now I've had to sort of be kind of, had to listen. And I guess I feel stronger than I ever have before. And I think, I know I'm resilient. You know, I know that I have been through quite a lot, and I just, now I'm positive, and I just embrace every day. I take it a day at a time. You know, I keep it in a day, and I'm just grateful that I've got another day on this world and earth, and I'm able to live. And if I help somebody that day, brilliant. And, you know, for me, it's having a purpose. That was the biggest thing that shifted. Now I have a purpose. You know, sharing my story, helping change health and social care by good and bad care that's happened, supporting new stoma patients who are scared, who are really frightened. At that point, I would have loved to have the help. You know, to be able to do that is just amazing, and I am grateful. I've got to know a part of me that I never thought I would, and if I hadn't had this experience, I probably wouldn't have got to at the age of 34. It might have taken me longer. Thank you for listening. I would now like to leave you with 3 reflective questions. Do you really listen? Do you have lived experience you can use in your profession? How can you use the patient's voice better?
Thank you for watching this Meaningful Conversations episode. We hope you enjoyed it. If you would like to see more videos in this series, then please like and subscribe to this channel and hit the bell so you can get notified of new videos as they're posted. We look forward to seeing you in the next one.